Welcome to the live stream tonight here on my channel here, ryanenser at YouTube, and we're doing a series called Where is God? We're going to discuss a subject called union tonight, and I hope that it's a blessing for you. We're going to also be having some comments from the audience, questions. I did want to lead with a song. I think that during this difficult time, it's good to worship the Lord. So I'd like you to sing along if you know it. It's Your Love Never Fails by Jesus Culture. And even if you don't know the words, okay, you can sing along or just enjoy the music. Think of it as worship too, that we're singing the song to God and honoring Him with our song. Nothing can separate, even if I ran away. Your love never failed. I know I still make mistakes, but you have new mercies for me every day. Your love never fails. You stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in. And when the oceans rage, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. Amen. We just wanted to encourage you with that song. Song talking about how God is a stable and sure foundation, that He really doesn't change, even though we're struggling with a lot of change in our life, uncertainty, difficulty. At this time, we can stand on God and the firm foundation He is, the unchanging character that He has. And additionally, we just had a discussion at the church, Cornerstone Church here on Grand Island in Buffalo, New York, about how God works all things together for work. God works all things together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose. And this song also explains that. So I hope it's been encouragement to you. We're going to talk about this idea of union tonight. And I want to show you a question I want to ask to you if you're listening right now, to let me know if you've ever been drawn into a movie where you feel like you're really there with the character. So I put the question on the screen here. As you're looking at this question, think about, have you ever been drawn into a movie so that you felt like you were really there with the main character? This is something that some of you have experienced, and I want to encourage you to share out if you've had this happen. I've got a situation example from my own life where it was quite a while ago now. It's actually 21 years ago when The Matrix came out. Some of you have seen The Matrix. I'll show you the cover of the movie here for some of you that may have forgotten. So The Matrix was a big movie at the time, and it really caught me. I mean, I love this movie, The Matrix. Well, in The Matrix, the main character is Neo, and there's so many movies where the main character is trying to save the world and all that. But for me, I really felt like I wanted to be right there with Neo, walking through the difficulties and battling like he was against it was the evil forces of the machines trying to destroy humanity. So to me, Neo in the Matrix was a character that really drew me into the movie, and I felt like I was really there. I felt like I was really there with him, and that I even wanted to be him. I mean, I literally wanted to be Neo. I wanted to be saving the world, fighting all the evil, machines that were trying to ruin everything for people and, slaughter people and all the horrible things that were going on. So I wanted to ask you, if you want to share out, just put the name of the movie or a character from a movie that made you feel like you were really there, like it was you in the movie, not just an observer. That's kind of the idea. And for me, The Matrix was really it. And when you're watching the movie The Matrix, if you ever want to check it out, I'd highly recommend it. It's the first one, by the way. They made 3 of them. I feel like the first one was quite good, even compared to the others. But when you're thinking of the Matrix, there's a scene where Agent Smith, who is one of these evil characters, he's got Neo in a headlock, and he's calling him his name Mr. Anderson, which is an old name that he used to go by when he was just a regular employee, working at this mundane job. And so Mr. Anderson now is calling himself Neo. So the agent Smith, who's trying to kill Neo, he keeps calling him Mr. Anderson, his old name from when he was really nobody in particular. Well, when he wanted to defeat the agent and he wanted to defeat the evil, he says, "My name is Neo," and he rose up and he was able to begin to defeat the agent. Well, this was such a monumental scene. I really felt like I connected closely. This is where I wanted to be. I see some people here writing in about their movies that they really felt like they were there, and one of them here from John Schultz is Passion of the Christ. And I think that's awesome. If the movie had such an impact on you, you felt like you were really there. I see John Sherholtz here saying that he likes Hacksaw Ridge, and he really feels like he's there. He connects so closely with it. Sean Jones is saying Star Trek Undiscovered Country. I've seen some really good Star Trek movies myself, and I think that these guys are saying that these movies they were such an environment, such an experience, that it was like they were really there in the movie. So I'm really happy you guys shared. Now, our subject tonight in the series Where is God? Our subject is union, and I want to tell you that the idea of being so closely connected with the main character of the movie, it's like you're united with the character, like you've almost shared your identity or become that character. And that's what I want to talk tonight about, especially focusing on a key verse here from Galatians 2. So I will put that verse on the screen, Galatians 2:20. And this verse really is one of the verses in the New Testament that discuss union with Christ. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. So if you look at that verse, you can see that it says Christ who lives in me. And this is that idea of sharing your identity or being so closely united with someone, in this case, Jesus Christ. And I think that some of you here have already heard of this verse, have already experienced something like this. And I wanted to ask, as you've shared about some movies, as you've thought about Christ living in you, maybe in the past, before tonight, how would you compare living in a movie with for just an hour and a half with Christ living in you? Like, how would you compare the experience of that? So if you can write a comment in regarding how you compare the experience of being really there in the movie, like in your mind, you feel like you're there, with being really there, really unified with Jesus Christ in real life. How would you compare those things? Do you think there's some kind of similarity there that you would be willing to share a little bit about? Do you think there's some difference that you'd be willing to share about? I think when you're talking about a movie, when you're talking about Jesus Christ, we're talking about a movie that is fiction generally. So I think you've already got to realize that there's a real life versus not real life difference between the two. So when you're thinking of comparing and contrasting these, but in addition, I was thinking also that when you have a movie that goes on for an hour and a half, it's really just a limited experience. Like you're going to be there really in the movie with the characters for a period of time only, and it ends. It doesn't continue to go on for a long time. For those that are listening, we're talking about the question of comparing living through and with a character in a movie versus living through and with Jesus Christ when we're talking about this Galatians 2 passage about Christ living in you. And if you have an experience you want to share about that, comparing and contrasting these, you can surely comment, and we'll discuss what you say. I think that when it comes to a movie character and how you get really into the movie, some of us would say that it's actually a more real experience than maybe what they've experienced with living with Christ in you. So some people, I think that they probably feel that they've connected more emotionally, they've connected more in their thoughts with a movie experience than they do sometimes with Jesus Christ. I think that could be another way to compare and contrast these. I think everyone has different experiences they would offer. I see John Sherrills here is saying that when Jesus is very human and frustration with people, he's saying that when you connect with Jesus Christ is when he's frustrated with people, just like a regular person, just like we are. I think that's a good point, John. When you think of how am I connecting with Jesus Christ, sometimes it's when Jesus is really a lot like us, we start to think, I think I do feel like I know what Jesus is going through. The more that he seems human, I think is what John's getting at. He says, I feel at one with Jesus when he struggles with people. And, we struggle with people, so it seems that, if we see Jesus also struggling with people, that would be that connection there. So I do like that you shared that, John. I appreciate that. And talking about union with Christ right now, the main verse we're talking about is Galatians 2:20, where it says that Christ lives in us and that we live by faith in that relationship with Christ. I see John Schultz here says, sometimes during private prayer and worship, I felt his presence and been moved to tears or joy. I felt I was not alone. John, I really appreciate that comment because, some of us are, from what I understand, probably thinking that the emotional and captivating experience of a movie could be more than they've noticed or they've felt with Christ. And I think that the way you're saying that you've really felt a very real experience with Jesus Christ, I think that, as we share those kinds of experiences, others will start to see that there is something more there, that there's something to be experienced with Christ that maybe they haven't yet. Something that's at a deep level, that's at a heart level, that's in your thoughts, in your heart, in your mind. And I think that that's definitely something that you're encouraging people with by sharing that. So I appreciate that, John. I see Kareem's with us on here. And Kareem, nice to see you. He's over in Europe at the moment. We used to be in a home group together back in Beirut, so I'm really thankful to see him on here. Habibi, from now, I wanted to share a little bit about how the union with Christ that we're talking about, where you're unified and sharing your life like when you join that character in a movie, and even more because it's a real thing. I want to share a bit about how there's some amazing benefits that come from union with Christ that some of us may be taking advantage of, some of us may not be. So I wanted to share about them so that I can encourage you to take advantage of some of these great things that come about from the union with Christ. So the union with Christ isn't just something that is sort of giving us a a nice thing to talk about. Oh, I have this maybe an emotional experience once in a while, or I have some kind of connection with God once in a while. That what is it really doing for us? So I want to share some of these benefits with you. And the first benefit I want to share, it involves something that you'd possibly connect with. A situation of being in court. So I wanted to ask this question, and you can share your thoughts in the comments about this question. So the question is, when have you been accused of a crime and you are standing in front of the judge? What are your thoughts and feelings? So here's my question again. When you have been accused of a crime and you're standing in front of the judge, what are your thoughts and feelings? So I'm really asking if you would think back to a time when you've been accused in front of the judge and you're in the courtroom. What are the kinds of feelings that you have experienced? What kinds of thoughts? Try to think back. For some people, this experience would be something that they would not forget. So I wanted to, have you share something that maybe you can remember from an experience like that. And I'm happy to hear some more people are commenting here. I see Soleil is a student of mine that I haven't seen in a while. Nice to see you. And Neha's on here. Also Mike Lynch. Now Mike Lynch is sharing about what I had for this question. So let's go back to this question. When you're in front of the judge, what are you feeling? Well, Mike Lynch says he feels fear, anxiety, shame, and guilt. These are excellent words to describe, I think, the way that someone is feeling. I see Sean Jones sharing about being scared. John Schultz is sharing about being nervous, and I do agree with these terms. When I was thinking of this, it made me think of those kinds of things. I see fear here again. John Sherholtz, thanks for sharing. When you have these kinds of feelings, and you have this kind of experience, I think that you're up there, you're in front of the judge, and you just don't want to be that person anymore. I feel like when you're in that position, I mean, I was in court. I had a police officer telling the judge about how I had made a traffic mistake, and I'm being charged with this traffic infraction, and I'm feeling the shame of being up there, just like these guys are saying, and I feel like the thing that you want at that time is to not be yourself. You want to be somebody else, because basically anybody else in the entire room and the entire building is not being accused. It's just you. There's a loneliness. You're standing on your own, and now you're in the shame, feeling shame. You're in that kind of state. Well, with Jesus Christ, we are united to him, and the person that we are gets covered by him. That's the amazing thing. So the reason why I wanted you to think about being in front of the judge is because when we're with Jesus Christ, your own identity and your own characteristics are covered by Jesus Christ. That's what the union does. See, his characteristics are better than ours. So when the union happens, he actually covers all of these things that we have that we don't want to have. So let me show you a little a graphic that will show you what I mean by that. Take a look at this graphic here. When you're experiencing a union with Christ, you're going to see different kinds of characteristics. And in this graphic, it's going to move through 3 different panels. So the first one shows Jesus as sinless, righteous, and not guilty. You can see those three characteristics there. Well, mankind's characteristics are sinful, unrighteous, and guilty. So when you're with Jesus, then the arrow comes in. The union between Jesus and us comes together, and the arrow is the transfer of his characteristics to you. The fancy word for that is impute. Impute means to give characteristics to something that doesn't have them. So Jesus is giving his characteristics to you. He's giving the sinlessness, the righteousness, and the not guilty characteristics to us as mankind. And it's a really amazing situation. So we're in front of the judge, and the judge sees us as guilty and we're being accused. Well, then Jesus comes in the union with us, and he covers our characteristics. He makes us into a person that's not like that in our status before God. Now, are we really still sinners, and are we really still unrighteous and guilty? Yes. But Jesus' characteristics cover ours, and that's the benefit of the union of Jesus Christ, is that he is now the one that represents the characteristics that God looks at when he sees us. So we're not before God in the same way that we were before. Think of when you're watching that movie and the character is possibly not like you very much. Maybe you're watching a character who's physically a beast and you're not. Well, that's your thirst for the characteristics of that person to put on yourself. You want those characteristics. Well, with Jesus Christ, the union with him, his characteristics come to us. It's really an amazing thing. And if any of you guys want to comment on how you've thought about this, the characteristics of Jesus Christ and that union and what it does for our characteristics, you can of course comment about that. I see a couple more people added some comments regarding when you're in the courtroom and how you feel. Some people have said humiliation, weak. I see Jonathan Robertson here says denial, and these are some of those feelings you have when you're up in the front like that and you're on your own being accused. I think Sean Jones is mentioning about a situation he was in. He says he was charged with use of cell phone while he was driving, and he was worried, but he never did get a ticket, I guess. So that's good he didn't get a ticket. Actually, I got a ticket for that one time, so I have to admit, using the cell phone while driving, don't do it. I got caught, so then I had to get one of those earpieces. That was before the stereos in the car. You could just talk to the steering wheel, and I advise you don't talk on a cell phone while driving a car. This is definitely a mistake. I see that Mike Lynch commented in here. The fact that God knows my heart and still loves me is beyond human understanding, even my own. This is an excellent thing to say here, Mike. I think that the way we're looking at this union with Christ, God knows what we're like, just like Mike's saying. He knows our hearts, and yet he still is willing to form a union with us so that his characteristics are covering us, and his amazing love is covering us, and we're no longer exposed and accused and shameful in front of the court like we had been before. So I'm really thankful for that comment. Now take a look at a verse that we can use to discuss this idea of God giving us his characteristics. So if you look at Romans 10:4, it says, "For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes." Let me just read that one more time. "For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes." You see, with Jesus Christ, he's giving us his righteousness. And here's a verse that says that. When he gives us his righteousness, the amazing thing is that our righteousness then becomes covered, our unrighteousness becomes covered by his righteousness. And so we don't have to walk around with the guilt and the shame that we had before. Now we have a covering over us, a change. The characteristics are now changed by Jesus Christ giving us his. So it's really an excellent situation for us to be in. And if you're tuning in now, I just want to let you know that we're discussing the subject of union. The series is Where is God? And tonight's subject is union. We're talking about union with Christ and how we are joined together with Christ. It's something similar to when you are watching a movie and you join with the character in the movie, and that character and you are sort of like together, almost like you're living the same life together. Well, Jesus Christ is not a movie. He's real life. And so we're living that life with him together. I see a question down here from John Sherrill. It says, "Why does he put his holiness on me?" It's a great question. Why does he do it? And really with the question of why is he giving us his holiness, you can think about God's grace to us, that he is someone who wants to love us and care for us even though we're really undeserving. You can think of why does he put his holiness on us? Also, I think from the angle of really we're someone who needs that holiness. We're someone who is so unholy that we need it. God's really doing like a charity. He's helping us in a way that we can't help ourselves. But I'm interested to find out too if anybody else would like to comment about why do you think that God puts his holiness on us? I think that God has a variety of motivations. And we're so thankful that he's willing to give us his own characteristics for ourselves. Anyone who's honest about their own sin, I think, realizes, wow, it's an amazing thing that God is willing to share what he's like, his gloriousness, and put that on us. So very happy about that. I wanted to also move on to this idea here about a question about how this idea of the union with Christ and how the way that he transfers what he's like to us, how has that affected you? So take a look at the question there. It says, how have you seen changes in your life since following Christ due to the transfer of his characteristics to your life? Let me just read it one more time, and you can think about, some of you have had this happen already, so you've thought about it before. Some of you, it might be the first time, but share as much as you're willing to. It says here, how have you seen changes in your life since following Christ due to the transfer of his characteristics to your life? Let me know what you think about that as we're discussing here this topic of union and really, our series, Where is God? God is with us in the union with Christ. That's really where God is right now. I see here Mike Lynch says that so that we can reflect him and be used as his vessel for the lost. So he's thinking that the changes in his life that he's seen is that being able, or I think he's actually answering John Sherrill's question about why does he put his holiness on me? And Mike Lynch is saying, so we can reflect him. So God gives us his holiness, and then we can reflect that and be used as a vessel for the lost. Really, we can be used as an instrument, as a tool from God to help lost people. And it's a great comment there. Jonathan Robertson also wanted to share a verse out of Psalm 139. It says, you see the depths of my heart, and you love me the same. Excellent verse there. Really encouraging to see that even though God knows all of the mistakes that we make, all the inadequacy that's in us, he still loves us anyway, loves us the same. That's really an encouraging thing to think about. And I think it's real life, so we can think of it as truth. We can also think of it as motivational. I mean, that's what God is doing. So let's get out there and care about people and share about what God's done in our lives. It's really such an amazing thing. The question here about change, I'll just put it up there one last time, about how have you seen changes in your life since following Christ due to the transfer of his characteristics to your life. When you think about the changes that happen that I wanted to mention is that you start to realize that God's giving you his not guilty status. Jesus Christ is giving you righteousness. Jesus Christ is giving you sinlessness. He's giving you these things, and though we're not perfect in those things, though we're not completely sinless, though we're not completely righteous, though we do have some guilt still in our actions and behavior, we can start to move from being the way we were to more like the characteristics that he's giving us. So we can start to try to be more sinless, try to do some of these sins less, or be more righteous, like try to eliminate some of the mistakes that we make in the way that we follow Christ. I see Ron Wilson here saying a priority shift from myself to others. I think this is an excellent thing to think about. So when you're not united with Christ, you might be considering yourself as the main purpose of your existence, to keep yourself going, to make yourself happy in many ways. But I think Ron's trying to say here that when you start to be unified with Christ and you see that selflessness that he's willing to give you so much, you want to then think of others more than just yourself, like Christ is thinking of you more than just himself. And I think that's definitely an important point to be making here, where there's a priority shift from myself to others. That's great. I really appreciate that. John Schultz is saying here, I used to be a man pleaser, worried what others thought. Since I have been saved, I try to be a God pleaser and pray to do his will continuously, regardless of what others think. That's great, John. I appreciate that. We're hearing about somebody who used to want to do what other people wanted, and now he wants to do what God wants. And this is another shift, you could say, like Ron had said, a shift from the way you used to be to a new way. And that's really what Christ's union with us is doing in here in John Schultz's life. I see that John Schultz is saying, I do not want bad stuff like I used to. I do not want evil anymore. Many sins lose their draw. It's like the interest, the motivation, what you're interested in starts to change when Christ is unified with you. You start to have a change of heart, really, is what we could say. And you're more interested in things that God's interested in. You're more interested in doing right instead of really the constant wrong that you may have done in the past. I see here serving others. This is also from John Sherholt. Serving others is more enjoyable than being served. This is another great point we can see where the union with Christ is making someone interested in serving others instead of just themselves. And the verse there, John 3:30, he must increase, but I must decrease. So thinking of others, thinking of even Jesus Christ, thinking of serving him rather than just serving yourself. I think this is definitely a great change that happens when you go from living by yourself to then being united with Christ. I want to share another important benefit of the union with Christ here, and that's the spiritual life. Really, there's a life that is a spiritual life. It's a living spiritual life, and it's contrasted in the New Testament with spiritual death and being dead. And some of you have more or less understanding about this issue, but when the union with Christ happens, when you're unified with Christ, he's giving you spiritual life. And I want to share a little bit more about that. Nowadays, spiritual life, you may have experienced this, maybe you could comment. You may have experienced that it seems like when someone says, what is spiritual life or what is spirituality, people sort of don't know what to say. They sort of think that anything that is spiritual for you is correct or right or spiritual. It could be any sort of answer, I feel like, and people are willing to say that that's spiritual. It's like nobody would want to say, no, that's not spiritual. Nobody would really put up a standard. It's sort of like anything goes. It's like hard to define right now. And I've also found another thing, maybe you've noticed it as well, that when you're talking with people, they have this idea that there's only things to be known through their five senses. You've got sight, you've got hearing, you've got smell, taste, you've got touch, and that these are the things that people think are reality, only things that can be known through the five senses. I feel like it's a prejudice. I call it the prejudice against the unseen world. It's like there's something where people are resisting that there is another thing to know, or there are another part of our lives that is not just the physical things you can see and smell and touch and all that. Maybe you've noticed the same thing where there's like this resistance to something that is real life, that is reality, but you can't see it. I feel like people are very much against that. So when I talk to people, I sort of wonder, like, what is it about the spiritual, the unseen world that I want to share with them to help them see that there is a spiritual part of humanity. So I'm wondering if you're interested in commenting. I've got a question here that I'd like to ask you about spiritual life. The question is, how would you help someone who doesn't think there is a spiritual component to humanity to see that it does exist? All right, so the question is really, how do you help someone who doesn't think there's a spiritual part of humanity, there's a spiritual component to humanity, to see that there is one, that there really is something that is not seen, that is not observable, that is not just by the five senses? So what would you say to somebody like that? You can go ahead and comment when you have something that you want to share that relates to that. Remember, we're here today talking about where is God, and in this series we're in the third episode about union with Christ, that Christ and a person will come together and the person starts to take on the characteristics of Jesus Christ through that union. The question we're talking about right now is about the spiritual life, and it seems to me that some people, they really don't agree that there is a spiritual life. And I'm wondering, what would you say to somebody who does not think that there is a spiritual part of people? There is a spiritual component. What would you say to them that would help them to see that there is one? And I'll take some comments about that. But one of the ways that I would do it, that I do it, is talking about movies. And I know we talked about movies at the very beginning of our message tonight, this stream. But see, movies, I think, really show that there is so much more going on. And the attractiveness of movies isn't because you can see and smell and taste and touch and all those things. The attractiveness in a movie, I mean, think of the plots that you love, the movies you love. You've got the rebellious son and the patient father who continues to love his son through all that. What kind of measurable, observable, five senses can deal with that. I mean, that's not something you see through your five senses. That's something that's deeper than that. And I think that John Sherholtz is connecting there. He's saying, is love just a chemical reaction? Exactly. I mean, when you talk about love, when you talk about some of these deeper things of us, those are the most important things to us. And yet those are some things that people sort of struggle to see as a spiritual part of us. They show us that there is a spiritual part of us. I was thinking of another movie plot that you may have noticed. So when you see a lot of movies, you'll find that at the beginning of the movie, the main character deviates and runs away from who they really are. And they start to give up their values. And then later in the movie, after they've done all this crazy stuff, they come back to themselves and they realize, I was really the person that I was at the beginning. And all of that stuff that I did in the middle, that's not really me. And so this idea of identity and searching for who you are and your values, I mean, none of that stuff is the five senses. This is showing that there's a depth to people. There's a spiritual depth to people. So I think that when you talk to people, one of the ways you can try to get them to move out of this, I call it the prejudice against the unseen world, is to just get them to think about some of these things. These are some of the most important things we go through. I mean, think of what are the most important events, when someone's born, when someone gets married, that hope that we see in marriage and birth, a death, a funeral. I mean, you see a part of life that is very, very emotional, very memorable. It sticks with us. It shows there's a depth to us, much more than just the physical world. And I think it helps us to see that there is a spiritual component to us. I see a couple of people have commented here. One person here, I think Sean's saying, yes, there's Sean. He's saying that he would approach them in love, someone who's struggling with, the spiritual life, and ask them some questions about Jesus. You could try to connect with them about Jesus. John Schultz is saying Christ used an explanation when talking to Nicodemus about spiritual things. You can check that Nicodemus story in the book of John, chapter 3. That would help you to look that up if you want to check out more about Nicodemus. John Sherholtz is saying the sum of our identity is just chemical reactions. Then what is the value of human life? A virus is just as valuable ultimately. It's a good point here. So when we're looking at life being just the physical world, the world that we can sense with our five senses, I mean, we're reducing really the value of a person, because if a person does not have that spiritual component, if there's no sort of eternal part of a person that's deeper than just his physical body. What's the difference between a person and another animal, or even a virus? I mean, we're talking about viruses nowadays quite a bit with this situation, this horrible virus that's ravaging the world. I mean, where do we think that a human gets more value than another, And I think that's another good point. You can talk about spirituality and spiritual life, and how a person is not just a bunch of physical experiences and the five senses. When you're talking about spiritual life, the spiritual life that we have in this union with Jesus Christ is shown, especially in a few verses. One I have here is Romans 6:11. Take a look at that verse on your screen. Romans 6:11 says, "So you also must consider yourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus." There's a a part of a person that is spiritual that you can sort of talk to anybody about to help them to see. But there's a difference when someone is united with Christ. There becomes a spiritual life. Their spirit is alive in a different way than it was before. The Bible discusses spiritual life and spiritual death very clearly in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, there was a little less clarity, but in the New Testament, it's very clear that there are two different kinds of situations. You can be spiritually dead, which is in your sin, in your natural, original sin birth. You can just grow up without any spiritual life, and you would be considered spiritually dead. You basically are living apart from God in a completely apart from God way. Well, in the New Testament, Jesus Christ wants to offer us spiritual life, which you'll see in that verse, Romans 6:11. And the spiritual life means that now your spirit is alive and that you are now connected and you are in union with Jesus Christ. That spiritual life that you have, it is new. It is something that was dead before. So now your life has changed because now you have spiritual life. And this is very important for our way we approach things going forward. So if you have already become spiritually alive, maybe you're taking advantage of some of the things that God is offering you from that spiritual life. Some people may be listening that haven't really become spiritually alive yet, have not taken advantage of the union with Christ, have not trusted Christ with their life. And so I want to share a little bit more about being spiritually alive. You see, there's some characteristics of spiritual life that we can take advantage of. And I want to put those on the screen real quick because I don't want to spend a very long time discussing each one. But I did want to mention them as we close out here, that the characteristics of the spiritual life involve the Holy Spirit dwelling in you from Romans 8:9, access to God's wisdom, 1 Corinthians 2:6-8, spiritual discernment, 1 Corinthians 2:15, and also praying God's will, not just praying anything, but also praying things that God wants and that you know God is interested in. And that's Romans 8:26-27. So basically, the idea of the spiritual life is that there's a new kind of life that now you can live, and it involves all of these components that I just shared. And you can always look into that more later if you're interested. I really hope that this message was encouraging for you, that this live stream was. I thank you for the comments. I see quite a few people had mentioned comments. I tried to read those back as best as I could. And I want to just leave you with this idea that where is God? God is really in our union with Jesus Christ. He's with us, and He's really covering us. He's covering the way we are with His way, and now we become a new person. We become a new person over time, but we become a new person in our status before God right away when that happens. And I want to encourage you, if you've never done that before, to ask God to reveal Himself to you so that you can take advantage of it as well. You can become a follower of Jesus Christ and accept that union with Him, and it will really change your life. It has changed mine, and I think many others. So reach out to me or reach out to another Bible-believing Christian that you know if you want to look more into it. I do want to pray before we go, and I want to say thanks for coming out. Lord Jesus Christ, we appreciate your love for us. We thank you that we have this union with you that has so many amazing benefits. I mean, to be given a new identity and new characteristics from your Son, Jesus Christ. Lord, it's just an amazing thing. It's something that you can only find here in Christianity, and something that not all of us have taken advantage of. So I ask you, Lord, help us to be people who follow Jesus Christ, who take advantage of our union with Him, who start to live in a way that reflects that union that we have. And Lord, for anyone who hasn't done that before, I encourage you to prompt them, really call them to yourself, give them that effectual call so that they will realize that you're calling them specifically to know you, and that's a personal situation.